Hello. I'm done. I'm here. It's great. Very good to see you all. How is it going so far? Excellent. I saw the food. I came in, I smelt the food, and I was like, oh my God, I'm so hungry right now. So it was great. That's us. Right. Before anything else, just to kick things off properly, I'm going to skip past something. We'll come back to that. Right. Labyrinth of the Demon King. New Zealand made. Came out this year. Absolutely awesome PlayStation 1 throwback, hard as nails, crazy horror game by our friend J.R. Hudapol. I had no idea this existed before it came out. It is awesome. And what I'd love us to do, just to kick off, frankly, I'd love us to give a clap for someone making an awesome New Zealand horror game. Yeah. Super cool, super hard, amazing. We can do incredible things here. I love this. Back to our more normally scheduled programming. Hi, I'm Colin. I do a bunch of different things. I am a horror writer and also in the habit of making stuff. There's a bunch of stuff going on there. I have not yet made anything as cool as Labyrinth of the Demon King, so we might try that. Right, today, what I propose for us, I'd like us to take a little walk in the rainy woods together. It's really about a sort of quite distinctive journey through what is horror, how do you find your own way through it, especially as a creator, and then I'd love us to go on several little side paths through the creepy woods around some things that have existed in horror that you may or may not be aware of. And I'd like to touch a little bit on the business side, quite a lot of it on the kind of feelings and emotions side, because that's kind of my core argument around this. And this is in no way, in 45 minutes, a full coverage of all of the history of horror and everything that's ever happened. The exact reverse. This is a very distinct little wander through the woods. So the 10,000 things that I'm missing out of this talk, that's the point, if you make as it goes. Are you up with me for a wander in the woods through horror? Thank you. I appreciate it so much. I feel so validated right now. This is great. Appreciate it. We're going to have fun. So where we start, horror is different. And it's different in terms of games and in terms of other things. The most obvious thing in terms of games, I would argue, is that horror is not a game mechanic. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about that soon. It is not a platformer. It's not even a first-person shooter. It is, in a way, it's a place we go. And there are several aspects to this. I mean, okay, in theory, anything we do with our imaginations is a place we go. But I think horror is a very distinctive territory that we enter. And I don't think it's a coincidence that most really interesting horror things actually are grounded very much in a physical place where you or the hero is kind of trapped in some way. Now, a really obvious thing, there is the scary house, there is the serial killer is chasing you. That's great. But, for instance, relationships. Relationships, if you are trapped in the house with a monster, can be very interesting things. Psychological spaces. We go to these places and we experience something. Horror is often defined, in my experience at least, and it's part of the most delicious aspect of horror. It's this half-open doorway. Stephen King does this so well. We're not going to show you the whole monster, not just yet, but there's a doorway that cracks open. There's something you can halfway glimpse through there. And some part of our souls goes, no, run away. This is the worst time. And the other part of us goes, what's through that door? I must see that. There's that awesome duality to it. And we're also going to talk about that a little bit as well. And then, perhaps a little more esoterically, but I think this is the core of it. When I look at my relationship with horror, both as a kind of enjoyer of horror, as someone who makes horror, there's something about it that is a secular spiritual practice. And again, fancy words for a simple thing. I think horror actually, at its best, often demands something of us that a lot of other genres and aspects don't. And this, when you fall in love with horror, I think this is one of the things we fall in love with. We fall in love with things that are hard, not things that are easy. So, to start off with, I'd like to take us to a place. By the way, does anyone know what this is? Thank you. I was going to owe someone chocolate if anyone got it, but I was reasonably confident. So, this is The Abbey in the Oakwood, Abtei im Eichwald, and it's by Caspar David Friedrich from 1810. This is one of those things where when I first saw it, I just instantly responded in some way. I think when I first look at it, I respond to the most obvious thing, which is the contrast. There is this glorious open sky. There is this darkness down below. And in the middle, there are these fingers of trees and a broken building and civilization. We're not going to be able to see it very well in this room. There is actually human detail in this place. And you may have to, well, I don't even think squinting will work, but I will describe the human detail for you. The human detail is all in the darkness below. When you see the actual painting, it's much more obvious. There is a procession of monks. They are heading for the Abbey Gate. They are carrying a coffin. There are 2 candles, and this is freaking hard to see even on the real thing. There are 2 tiny pinpricks of light. By the way, I feel so fancy. I feel like a university lecturer for the first time. About there, in the actual painting, there's 2 little candles, and that's the only thing that is lighting the way for these monks. Otherwise, they have no illumination other than the sky. There are crosses and an unearthed grave in the fields around them. And what I feel is this is a world where time and nature are utterly inevitable, and human beings are very, very small. I love this. Friedrich is an interesting character because he was a German painter who was incredibly romantic. He goes with feelings first. And he was doing this at the exact same time in Germany that the entire fashion pushed towards classical. So he was utterly out of favour. He died broke, as many painters do. And about 100 years after he died, the Nazis and Hollywood both discovered his work and put it in a bunch of things. There are bits of this all through early Disney, if you know where to look. And if you go back in lineages, I think you can make a reasonable argument. This is Diablo. This is Eldritch. This is Path of Exile. There's a lineage that comes from Friedrich that he never intended. Other people tended to see things in his work. But what I find in this, and again, this is a place our minds go. I see souls that are struggling for coherence amid darkness. And that really responds to me. So I'm going to grab a bit of water and then I'll take us somewhere else. I do apologize, by the way. I kind of thought that we wouldn't get all the detail, but if you look this painting up, you'll see it. And you're like, why would anyone paint a thing where you can't see most of the people? And it's like, I think that might be the point. A different place. This is Papatoetoe Central School, around about 1986. This is probably the most kind of grim and gothic version of this photo that I could find you, but I certainly intended that way. If we're talking about places we go, this was my primary school. I didn't enjoy it. It holds many horrible memories. Not super horrible, but primary school sucked. This is one of those things where no matter how much you grow up, how much money you get, all those type of things, somewhere, every once in a while, I go back to this place. And I am 7 years old, 8 years old again. And again, it's such an interesting thing because in my mind, I know all the physical geography. I can wander through this, and that wandering corresponds exactly to a bunch of emotions that I felt when I was 7 or 8. And perhaps as an adult, I can contextualize them a little, but really, I'm a 7-year-old kid. Again, we go places in our minds, we go to things where we are somehow trapped. One interesting aspect of primary school, at least for me, it had a fence around it. You could not go over the fence. You were literally trapped in primary school for about 6 hours per day. So, 2 places. Now, doorways. And this is a difference. Again, we are wandering through the rainy woods. This is a little random. It does come together, I promise. How do we invite someone not only to adventure, but to that feeling of the half-open doorway and horror? One of the most obvious ways that we do this as creators is through book covers. And to me, this is the original TikTok video. This is the thing that we get obsessed with and fall in love with. Did anyone read Fighting Fantasy? I love it, yes, with friends. Okay, so you know all about it. Those Fighting Fantasy game books, which were out in the 80s, the covers, if you were 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, The covers just absolutely promise something. The Forest of Doom, this guy is going to eat you. I was obsessed about this. I have never read Satan's Snowdrop. What a title. What an invitation to something ghastly and cheap and nasty and awesome. I love it. Stephen King, obviously, I think very famously, that whole run of Stephen King book covers is literally just a doorway to people's imaginations. I mean, arguably all of Stranger Things comes from a certain font and a certain thing. Stephen King and his publishers were the masters of that. And the equivalent, Dracula, similar vein, here is a half-opening grave, here is a dangerous but elegant hand. Dracula, come here. These are wonderful invitations. Now, speaking of invitations, possibly the greatest invitation to imagination, adventure, and horror ever invented. This is the Dungeons & Dragons, this is the second basics box from about 1983. Who here has encountered some version of role-playing or Dungeons & Dragons? We are all friends, this is awesome. I think you know what I'm talking about then. In this case, there is this physical box. The box holds something mysterious, and on the front, there is a promise that inside this box, your dreams of adventure will be realized. For me, on my own walk in the rainy woods, D&D has always been quite horror-inflected, and this is because the first person that I played with seriously as a teenager, who was our game master, he would always nab the Ravenloft modules, and he'd send our kind of party of adventurers off to fight the zombie lord over and over again. So this was sort of, to me, this is a horror space. And then on that exact note, again, when I was 9, there was a place in Papatoetoe called Cavendish Computers. And I did not care one bit about Cavendish Computers, except that on their shelf for more than a year, they had the box for Ultima 5 Warriors of Destiny. And I would go in there anytime I possibly could, and I would just stare at that box. I had no idea what Ultima was. I had no idea what the game was. I did not have a computer that could run that game. And something about that very impressive cover scared the hell out of me. I actually had nightmares, no kidding. And also made me want more. Obviously, as a slightly older person, I can see that the composition is very Frazetta-like. They've based a bunch of stuff. I don't care about that. It's scary. Look at this. And then, of course, there's that fascinating thing of if you actually do play Ultima, and Ultima is a wonderful foundational thing, can the thing on the right really live up to what I imagined for months was the Warriors of Destiny? But again, a wonderful doorway. So, two first things, places we go, doorways and promises that we make, both of which to me are crucial as we construct horror. We have not gone near game mechanics yet. We have not gone near horror movies or anything in that sense, but just these doorways, these promises that we make to people and ourselves. Now I'd like to go on another Rainy Woods diversion. I took some time a little while ago to actually try and find and play the early horror games. The really early ones, actually load them up on emulators and get them going. So we're going to go on a short excursion where we're going to end up at the horror game that you all know, and we're going to look at stuff before that, because I found some interesting things, at least myself. So how did games come out of the dark with horror? So initially, and I think this is very interesting, we mostly did it with mechanics. Games tried to think, what are the mechanics of horror? How can we represent those in early video games? This is Haunted House from 1982 from Atari. It's actually a remake of a 1972 game, which was on the Magnavox Odyssey, which was even cruder. And this got remade recently in the Atari 50th anniversary. You are the eyes, your little pair of eyes. You are trapped in a haunted house. Things are chasing you. You have a very small inventory. You have randomized encounters with monsters, and ultimately, pretty much they will catch you. It's an interesting game to play because even though it is crude as hell, actually quite scary. Especially if you're like me and you suck at Atari 2600 games. A little bit after this, and this is one of my favorites of all time. This is 3D Monster Maze from 1982. This ran on the Sinclair ZX81. If you know what one of those is, you are about to get the joke. It's great. Most of it is actually text-based. Again, you are trapped in a maze with a monster. This does not show up that often. What you get is these big all-caps text messages Rex lies in wait. Rex is hunting for you. And this goes on and so on. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Rex terrifies the life out of you. It is Alien Isolation 45 years in advance. It is also, I should say, and this is the ZX81 joke, entire game, every aspect of it, 1 kilobyte of memory. That is far less than that image is taking up on that space. Let nobody ever tell us that we need $200 million budgets to do something that connects with people. 1 kilobyte for an entire game. So these are the early kind of attempts where we don't have the graphics. We do potentially have some of the mechanics. There are other kind of bits where most early RPGs of that time have some horror elements. But then in the 80s, famously, we really start going because graphics reach a kind of VGA type level. This is Splatterhouse from 1988. First off, best title for a game ever. It promises what it delivers. I've included the Japanese cover on the right because, again, the Japanese know how to do horror game covers. How cool. Side-scrolling action. Lots of gore. Huge amounts of attention have been paid to the disembowelment sprites, far more than any other part of the game. It references a lot of cinema, and this is where you really see games starting to be in that phase where it's like, well, we need to borrow things from film because we're not as good as film. So there's a real kind of inferiority thing there. Deeply controversial. The people who made it knew exactly what they were doing. They got a lot of attention, which made it a lot of money. Interestingly, if you look at mechanically, it's not mechanically special. It's a side-scroller. There's not really anything else going on. We just put a guy with a chainsaw. We did a lot of gore. So the horror shifts from the mechanics or the imagination to just being visual. Here is some horror. And if you like that, I don't know if many of you will have heard of this. I apologize if there are any 4-year-olds in the audience. This is a relatively obscure game called Chiller. It's from 1986. It's a light gun game. So you're blam, blam, blam sort of thing. What you are doing in this light gun game, you actually shoot the torture instruments, and the torture instruments, when you shoot them, do things to the people. I have no sort of further explanation for this. It was just a wonderful thing that I found on my little journey, so yes. Then we go into the 90s, and again, this is a vastly truncated journey, but I think these are interesting points, right? In the 90s, 1995 to be exact, the Japanese, as you may expect, start to do very interesting things. This is Clock Tower. This is one of those games that most people haven't played, but it's sort of the uncle, the granddaddy, whatever, of a lot of other games. You are being stalked by Scissorman, excellent name, through a series of things. And it's actually a point-and-click survival horror. It has a lot to it. There is a world, there are characters, there are people, there is atmosphere. It is a very interesting title. And then, at the end of this little segue into the Rainy Woods, a game comes along that ties together all of these things: mechanics, imagination, cool box covers, cool name, stuff. Can you see that? Emerging from the darkness. I'll have a lighter version in a sec. I did not think we'd be in such a bright lit room today. Resident Evil. Resident Evil changes everything because it brings together what's arguably the first coherent, lasting horror franchise in games. And I don't want to talk about Resident Evil because everyone else has. You know Resident Evil perfectly well. In the darkness, you may not be able to see it, I chose the HD cover because Resident Evil, obviously now, it's fundamentally a place you go. Resident Evil 1 is a house. You are trapped in a house. Every good Resident Evil, I would strongly argue, is defined by its location. And this is something that Resident Evil has always done very well. The core mechanics do change, and they're relatively straightforward. The story, depending on your taste in stories, is up and down. Resident Evil is always a place we go, where we encounter things. And it's interesting because obviously looking back, we understand this. We can look back easily and say, well, that was the whole thing. All those other games ended up with Resident Evil. This is the original cover of Resident Evil when it first came out. And it's an action dude who's going to shoot some people, and there's none of that. So even at the time, we should never forget that Resident Evil was an accident, in a sense. People were making one game and they ended up making another one. Now, back to me, because, places we go. And one of the things we started doing over the past year on a project we've been working on is really going, what are these locations in our imaginations? So the most obvious thing that we can start with is a small town. Does anybody know where this is? I'm gonna do it. Screw it. Dun, 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 boom, boom. Dun, 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 boom, boom. I would argue that if you hear those notes in some bit of form, and you see that and you see the sign, you are instantly transported to a place. It's jumbled up timeline, but Twin Peaks is 1990. It enters into culture like a missile. It is no coincidence that the next 15 years are filled with creepy small towns and things. One thing I note about Twin Peaks, because I watched it recently, both the original and the new one, and this is a point I'm going to return to. Twin Peaks is full of absolutely extraordinary contrast. Even in the pilot episode, there are points where literally the image is almost entirely black, and it's horror. It's straight up terrifying. And then 5 minutes later, guys are dancing on desks. It's goofy as hell. We're singing along. It's a whole lot of fun. And this is something that you really learn, I think, when going through horror. And we're going to come back to this. The mechanics of I'm being chased through a house, sure. But really, if you have enough of a space, if you have enough of the goofy fun stuff, that gives you space to then go as black as you like. And our brains really like this. I would strongly argue that one of the reasons that Twin Peaks endures so well is it seesaws. It would be kind of unwatchable to try and watch 2 whole seasons of just a really pitch black horror. And it would be boring to watch 2 seasons of really goofy stuff, but you never know what's coming. It's an interesting place. Again, there is chocolate to be done, if anyone knows what this is, and I think this is easy. Dude, congratulations. A round of applause, please. Nice. Mysteriously soon after all of these weird small towns start emerging, the Japanese, as they do so brilliantly, produce a game that is wildly atmospheric. It has a title, so the secondary title, I'll just read out, Country of the Woods and Repose, which again, what a title. It's an open world. There is a small town. You can wander around the town as a detective and you can find stuff. And again, this was probably technically very difficult, if not impossible, to do 10, 15 years ago. But Mizurna Falls, again, a granddaddy of a lot of the games we know. Mizurna Falls leads directly, by the way, to... this is Deadly Premonition from 2010. Deadly Premonition is famously a game that you genuinely, without irony, you tend to think is either literally one of the worst games ever made or one of the best. It's what would happen if a complete madman with zero budget tried to make his own version of Twin Peaks. And it is bonkers, but it's the same thing. It's an open investigation environment, a really weird, creepy small town, a demented detective. So much fun. Who goes through it. It is mechanically about as janky as a game can be and still be playable. And that's why people hate it. And there is something about the small town, the atmosphere, the absurdity that people fall in love with. So in general, we are not trying for the midline. We are not trying to be boring. If people hate us, that's okay, because that might be on the path to absolutely loving us. I'm going to very briefly comment on the current sort of commercial state of things, and there'll be a couple of slides that have a lot of information. I'm not really trying to get you to read it all, but it has been interesting. So at the moment, overall, there is a huge surge in cinematic horror. There have been several films that wildly outperformed expectations. Weapons is one, Sinners is another. But at the same time, interestingly, there have been several kind of brand name franchises that have stumbled. Megan, for instance, Megan 2, which everyone I think was betting would be a pretty solid hit, and it stumbled. I would strongly argue that it changed genre, it changed what it was, and people didn't like the expectation. The key thing that you find in terms of trends here, and this is always true of horror, and I've mentioned this before, you should not spend $200 million on horror anything, game or film. The sweet spot is somewhere, low, like for film, a low budget between $20 and $50 million. And if you do a smart thing that connects with a horror audience, you have a very good chance of making a lot of money back. And this is always true. This is also true for games, perhaps on a lower thing. Again, if you have a thesis, $200 million kind of on any entertainment product, if you're not called James Cameron, is potentially a bad idea. More figures, again, a bunch of stuff has come out. Some of it has wildly exceeded expectations and there have been some interesting failures. The games, and holy hell, what a week for games. Silent Hill F just dropped. Kind of the same pattern. When you actually look at what seemed to be the budget for even like high profile horror games, they are relatively low budget, especially in the AAA space. We're not needing to spend that much money. What you have to do is provide a horror audience with the things we've been talking about. And this goes all the way down to significantly low budget things. If I were an investor who could invest in anything and I was completely ignoring all other considerations, I would personally bet on the bear. I would bet on Five Nights at Freddy's. I have a 12-year-old niece who obsessively runs home every day and plays Five Nights at Freddy's. Five Nights at Freddy's knows exactly what it is. It knows exactly who its audience is. It's, again, it's creepy soft toys trapped in a space with you. They made a film that delivered exactly that and did very well. They're going to make another film. If you're talking pure business considerations for entertainment franchises, I would strongly suggest this versus some other things. But at the same time, this is the latest from one of my personal favorites, Puppet Combo. And this is a very small outfit out of the States who make PS1 era horror games for a very low budget. They sell it for a very low price. They do not sell very many copies, but I believe they are quite highly profitable. This is a taxi slasher horror video nasty game that is currently, I think you can play the first chapter. Again, no one is making it like tens or hundreds of millions out of this, but Puppet Combo, who are doing this, do not need to. We can be smart and interesting about the spaces that we go. Then, and this is something that can be very personal, and we are heading towards kind of the point in the end of the talk. On my little horror journey, I've sometimes run into problem children because I'm trying to sort of experience different things of horror, and I'm trying to fit them into kind of a theory, if you like, or like something that makes sense to me. There are things that sometimes don't make sense, and I have to ask myself why. And here's a few. So, this lovely picture, this is called Hyperorganism, and it's by someone called Aaron Elfrey, who is an artist that I am not familiar with. This is a creative response to Thomas Ligotti, who is a horror writer. And Thomas Ligotti is fascinating because he is, or was, very obscure. He's black as pitch. He has anhedonia, which is the condition where you can't feel joy, which does not sound like any kind of fun at all. And so his stories and his works are literally just kind of, we're going to start here and we're just going to go down. He is philosophically a pessimist. He got famous, Thomas Ligotti, because in True Detective, the character of Rust Cole, that philosophy was kind of a reference to Thomas Ligotti, so people started looking him up. So you have this guy, Thomas Ligotti, who writes deeply disturbing to me and really interesting horror fiction. The famous one is The Red Tower, which is not a story, it's literally just an extended description of a factory sitting in the middle of nowhere that produces horrible things. That's literally it. There is no twist. That's the story. Last Feast of Harlequin, which is full of sad-faced clowns. They're really interesting structurally, again, because they're almost not even stories. And the problem for me that I had to kind of come through was, I like a little bit of Thomas Ligotti. I like a little spoonful of dark, unrequited pessimism, and then I kind of want to come up for air. I can't dwell here forever. And Thomas Ligotti is the last person on earth who's trying to create a franchise of any kind. That's not what he's doing. But it's an interesting point of, this is awesome. There is zero contrast. And do we need that contrast we've been talking about in horror? Similarly, very recently, two excellent games, Chronos, The New Dawn, which is from Bloober Team, and Amnesia the Bunker. Who has played either of those games? Cool. And this is an interesting point. Both of them quite high-profile releases. So both of them, you're trapped in a dark space. In Amnesia the Bunker, you're trapped in a World War II fort, and it's all dark, except for the few times when you can start your light, and there's a monster. And Chronos is a little more advanced, but it's the same idea. To me, these are extraordinarily mechanically capable games with zero light, zero come up for air, and even I found both of them quite hard to play. And I suspect that the commercial sales numbers have actually really reflected that. If you play 10 minutes of Amnesia the Bunker, you know perfectly well that you probably can't play much more unless you are super hardcore. So again, it's something that I've wrestled with these because I respect all of these things. I respect the hell out of Thomas Ligotti. But as a consumer of horror, for me, for my taste, my walk in the rainy woods, I feel like I need the contrast. And speaking of problem children, an even more problem child, is anyone brave enough to say that they know what this is? Oh, there we go. Look, I'm not even surprised that the writers in the room are like, yeah, of course I know what Lost from Beyond is. My God. This is a independently produced, it's almost like a series of games. It's a kind of sex, occults, adventure game thing. And it's halfway sort of ancient, or like old creaking houses with kind of mystical cults. And half you're transported to hell and there are sex demons trying to kill you. I can see some people are rushing out to buy it already. I was like, this is great. It's an interesting one to me because a bit like, what is it, Deadly Premonition, mechanically, these are rough games. They are arguably not well mechanically designed. And you may or may not be into the whole sex occult thing. That seems like a minority position, or not. One thing I can from this, and this is actually why I quite like this, somebody absolutely loves this world that is here. You can actually really see, and then I kind of did some reading and I believe it's true, the people who made this, they have built out their whole world, they have backstories for everyone, they care about the world of Lust from Beyond, where there are the sex demons and the giant houses. It's a really interesting quality that you do find sometimes, and I think you find it in almost all interesting horror. Somebody loves this, and I found that it was a really interesting little moment. So if I can, the lesson that I took, especially from these, but in general, I think as creators, we can take much more seriously the idea that difficult confrontations equal growth. This is true in real life. I suspect it's very true in certain kinds of games, in certain kinds of spaces that we can go in our mind. And obviously there is a vast trend, Dark Souls aside, over the past kind of 20 years to give players the smoothest experience possible. A lot of game design comes down to basically removing obstacles to that. Again, really not with the Dark Souls stuff as the exception. There is a spiritual process in here somewhere, and that may be wildly pretentious to say, but I think we can genuinely take it quite seriously. When people fall in love with things, they often fall in love with them because they are a combination of difficult and they provide growth. And I think most of the very best horror things provide something of both of them. Here is a place that we're going to take you. You can glimpse through the open door that it's both terrifying and interesting. If you step through, you're going to undergo some kind of process that is not going to be easy. This is not going to be a walk in the woods. But at the end of it, you will come out changed in some way. You will feel in some sense that you have grown. And that applies to a lot of art, but I think it strongly applies to horror. So, we took all that. All these things, we go to places, we show half-open doorways, and we look at things that are potentially hard in some way, not necessarily mechanically. And I'm very pleased to announce that at the moment, my team are building the very early production prototypes of something that we're doing, which does match all of these things, a little thing called Tiny Haunted Bookshop. And it's very much the combination of the stuff we're talking about. What are things we love? I love books. I love old bookstores. I love the sense that, how did that octopus get into that jar? What's under the desk? What's in this place? So more about that very soon, hopefully. And at the end, if anyone wants to be on a Discord, there will be a Discord link at the end, so please do. So to recap, we are now strolling out of our misty, rainy woods. Thank you very much for coming on the journey. We can go places through art that feel universal. And it's really interesting asking those questions of art, like, where is it taking us? So the universality of art that we are confronted with, especially as we grow and evolve. We can then take that, place that's universal, and we can make it very specific to us. What are the places that we as individuals go in our minds, in our souls, in our nightmares, and they're almost always related somehow to childhood or struggle or trauma or whatever it is. And as horror creators, as creators in general, but specifically in horror creators, we can turn those things into things that give back to the world and give us and our audiences the chance for both some kind of difficult confrontation, but also growth. And ultimately, that is what we are all about as human beings. Thank you very much for coming on the walk with me. I super appreciate it. If you should like, the tinyhauntedbookshop.com goes straight to a Discord server. The QR code goes straight to a bunch of stuff. I would love to hear from you at any point, but thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, guys. The second wave. Cheers.